Hey guys, welcome back. So we're jumping back into our talks on Judgment Day. And with doing so, we're finally getting into what happened in that 1 hour that Uranos had went to Arakko. And all we had seen before was him leave behind a whole lot of bones and dust. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get your spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so recently when we started our talks on Judgment Day, we'd seen how Druig had planned this attack on Krakoa to be on one hand an assassination attempt towards the Five, but in the broad scope more so a distraction for the attack taking place on Arakko, with both attacks happening simultaneously. And in the last couple videos, we talked about what happened on Krakoa, from what we've seen in Judgment Day issues 1 and 2, as well as the more in-depth look that we got in Immortal X-Men issue 5, as we stepped into the Quiet Council meeting and we saw this whole thing take place from the perspective of Exodus. But for this one, we've got to head back to Arakko and do the same at the Great Ring, as we're given a countdown of T-1 minute, and at this point, Nightcrawler's made his way here with both Magneto and Cable, cause like we'd seen, as soon as he got the word from Destiny about the Eternals getting ready to kill all the mutants, he made his way over here to Arakko to inform Storm, Magneto, and Cable, which had then caused Storm to need to be in two places at once, so Magneto told Storm to head to Krakoa and give them Arakko's perspective, while Nightcrawler stays on Arakko with Magneto and Cable and bring this information to the Great Ring. And at this point, once again, we saw what Storm had stepped into when she had went back to Krakoa, and I gotta say that I'm kinda glad that Storm left, and only because if she stayed, we wouldn't have got the ending that we did with this one. But also, aside from this, keep in mind that the 1 hour attack on Arakko that we're revisiting for this one, that again, it begins simultaneously with what we had seen with the Unimind attacking Krakoa, because if Druid had allowed this attack to happen any earlier, the element of surprise would have just been lost. So keep that in mind through the course of this. But starting this off back at Arakko, at the Great Ring, with about T-49 seconds on the clock before impact, Abigail Brand asks for confirmation from Arakko's leading precog, Idol. And keep in mind, through the course of this, these guys have no idea how much time they have. And much like Krakoa, these guys are just getting together to figure out what they're going to do. But with Abigail asking Idol if she wants to verify, it's not so much out of anyone doubting Destiny, but instead this is because the Great Ring, it has its structures much like the Quiet Council. And like we'd seen where the Quiet Council has its seasons, with its summer, winter, and autumn, and the Great Ring has its versions with dawn, day, dusk, so on and so forth. And in either case, each table will take the lead in a given circumstance. And for Arakko, in the event of war, which is what they are at now, Table Dawn takes the lead. And of the 3 seats at that table, you have A.X.E the Unbeaten, who sits in the seat of victory, so she calls the shots when the battles are won. Idol sits in the seat of stalemate, she makes the call when it's a draw, and Magneto sits in the seat of loss, so if they lose, he's calling the shots. So with Abigail asking Idol what her call is, it's really more so them following protocol before they kick the planetary defenses into full alert. But with Idol not being able to speak because Tarn had taken her tongue, and for that reason Aura then translates for her, saying, "An empty heart beats hardest, an empty hand deals the impossible blow, and the stalemates end with victories lost." And it's here where A.X.E the Unbeaten mentions that it's usually Storm who ends the stalemates around here, and she asks where is she today, to where then Magneto fills in A.X.E that Storm's filling in Krakoa on the Arakko perspective, while Nightcrawler's here in Arakko giving them Krakoa's perspective. And not long after this, they quickly then get to business with Cable handling the strategy in preparation, with him knowing that the Eternals won't want to risk Arakko coming in as backup, so it's highly likely that they'll attack both Arakko and Krakoa at the same time. And for Cable, just from experience and him being well versed in strategic planning, not only did he predict that the Eternals were going to hit both Krakoa and Arakko at the same time, but he also made the correct assumption that the Eternals' attack on Krakoa would be handled with restraint and possibly just on the psychic plane, unlike the attack on Mars or Arakko, where the Eternals would not have to hold back. And it's for that reason Cable tells them that they should expect the Eternals to attack Arakko with overwhelming force. But only seconds after him saying this, where by the way everything he said was right, but then seconds later we hit T-0 and this bright light then shows up. And initially Kurt's like, we gotta get out of here, we gotta get to safety, but then Magneto's like, nope, we don't do that here. Because even with Arakko's new establishment modeling a number of things after Krakoa, there's plenty that they stick to with their old ways. And for the Arakko, and more importantly for their leaders, you have to be prepared to lose everything. And for them, the idea of immortality or the resurrection program, it conflicts conflicts with a number of their ideals. And the biggest reason I believe why the Arakko are just against resurrection is because this was the way of the White Sword, of Okara, and not the way of Arakko. Because for Okara, the White Sword, he would resurrect his men time and time again. But the people of Arakko, they take pride in not fearing a life that ends. Because if you only live once, everything you do in that life has a heavier meaning. And just in the previous issue of X-Men Red, we'd seen Magneto destroy both his and Storm's backup, which in the case for Storm, there's a bit more to it. And we can get into that in another video if you guys want to do an X-Men Red playlist. But in the case of Magneto, with him destroying the backups, he expressed to the Great Ring, and really more so directly towards A.X.E, that he's not afraid of death, but instead what he does fear is who he will become if his life never ends. Because he knows if he lives to see the next season, that version of him will be cold and relentless. And if he fears anything, it's living long enough to see that version of himself. But with this happening, it was effectively Magneto eliminating his backup and Storm's backup so that if they die, it's for good. Though I do recall at one point Charles making additional backups that were hidden, but we're gonna leave that alone for now. But back to Judgment Day, T-0. This is just a bit more detail on what Magneto was referring to as far as the Arakko not fleeing and not fearing death. But also with this bright light showing up, Magneto then calls for A.X.E, the Unbeaten, so that she can quickly be a part of their first move, because if Arakko acts first against the enemy with A.X.E on their side, then they will effectively win. But as it turns out, A.X.E done it again, she switched sides, and she's killed Idol. And with seeing this, nearly everyone is like, okay, we're screwed. But then right away, Kurt pulls a move, which is probably one of, if not the most clutch moves within this hour that we didn't know about in Judgment Day issue 1. Because rather than it playing out like Kurt had just ran away and just gone straight to Krakoa, he instead grabs A.X.E and removes her from the board, prohibiting her from taking the Eternal side and completely dooming the Arakko people. But as soon as they leave, Judgment finally arrives. And it's here where Uranos, the Eternal Griefer, has entered the lobby. And you can tell that he's already pissed, because his arrival from the exclusion with the bright white light and everything, it took 29 seconds off of his clock. And that's 29 seconds deducted from his hour, so he might dispute that at some point in the future. But with Uranos arriving here, seconds later we also find that he's accessed his armory, which recently we had seen in Kieran Gillen's Eternals series, as well as the Eternals Heretic one-shot. And really the armory of Uranos, for the most part, it allows him to import in whatever he needs in order to get the job done. But also with him being one of the oldest of the Eternals, as well as the patriarch and head of one of their 3 dynasties, Uranos was made keeper of the secret arsenals of the machine. With a gesture, he can summon war itself and unleash a great tide of cosmic fire. But also with him knowing the secrets of the machine, he was able to make his own safeguards so that if he's killed, the machine dies as well. Which is the main reason this guy will never be in the MCU, because it'll be the end of the world if they kill him. But in the long and short of it, Uranos is not only one of the most powerful Eternals, but he also has access to the secret toys of the Eternals that are just meant to kill. And in this moment, he is releasing them all over Arakko, because as soon as he arrives, we see his armory open up in multiple locations, over Port Prometheus, with ships flying in, attacking without warning, in the Morrowlands, with biometallic slime, attacking the locals, and on every end within a 50-mile radius, you got people being eviscerated left and right, and the armory attacks are relentless, even above on Sword Station 2. And upon arrival, everything that these guys are throwing at Uranos, he's just walking through it. And when he's confronted by Aura, who's an Omega level mutant with the power to just look at someone and stop them from existing. But when she attempts to use this on Uranos, it doesn't work, and he just summons a left hook out of the armory and she's done. And at this point, over 6 minutes in, Legion then arrives, and he just descends upon Uranos and he tells him, outside. And when I first seen this, I was like, oh man, Legion's about to hand him the business. Because as soon as he says this to Uranos, Uranos is pretty much like, okay, let's go. And then 28 seconds later, Uranos comes back, and Legion does not. Like, he is just gone, just like that. And Magneto's just like, Charles, you bore a brave boy. But then from here, Magneto then calls for Lotus. And immediately Lotus, he knows what time it is, because he's an Omega level mutant with the ability to create metal with his words. So for him, with Magneto yelling his name, he just knows that it's go time. And Logos just gets to spitting like he's Busta Rhymes, look at me now. Like, let's go! Every time I gotta come and get it, then I gotta set it, then I gotta blow it, and I gotta get it. Like, he's just spitting out as much metal as he can get to Magneto as possible. And Magneto's able to bind Uranos with this metal, with Cable also helping using his telekinesis. And for a moment, Uranos is impressed, because they're actually putting up a fight. And Magneto Magneto tells Uranos that he's everything that Magneto has ever fought against, because to Magneto, Uranos is no different than the Nazis in Poland or the countless human organizations that have tried to get rid of mutants. But for Uranos, with him hearing Magneto say this, he's like, oh good, then this is personal, and he just breaks out of this constraint that was constructed by 3 Omega level mutants, and then he just rushes in and tears out Magneto's heart, with the clock now ticking at only 13 minutes and 23 seconds. And he does this while summoning even more of his armory to finish off the rest that are here. And at this point, Abigail Brand, she's lost contact with Station 2, and she can only assume that the keep is destroyed. And at this point for Cable, with him seeing Legion and Magneto catching Fade with the swiftness, he then goes all in with his Omega-1 pulse rifle, which is the most powerful gun that Cable has, which was, or technically will be, banned in the year 3877, with it being declared a weapon of absolute destruction, with it firing bullets of ultra-dense solid light along a tunnel of hard radiation that can melt osmium, which in real life is the hardest metal that we know of on the periodic table. But it's here with Cable shooting Uranos in the face with this thing. It weakens him, kinda, and after 3.5 minutes of constant fire from this thing, the Omega-1 pulse rifle jams, and it's here 17 minutes and 11 seconds in where Uranos then hits Cable with the point-blank sizzler. And then from here, Xylo tries to use his tentacles on Uranos, which otherwise would scour a human to the bone in seconds. But much like the others, this attack takes no effect on him, and he reduces Xylo's collective to 13.5%. Oh, and last but not least, Abigail Brand, she tried to avoid dying, but didn't work. But fortunately for her and also Cable, they're still part of the resurrection protocols. But again, for Cable and anyone else who's resurrected, like we'd seen in Judgment Day issue 1, when Cable was brought back, his memories were only restored from his most recent backup. So for Cable, like any of the others who were part of the resurrection program, he came back not even knowing what happened. But back on Arakko, Uranos had considered his job done in 20 minutes flat. And with the other 40 minutes that he still had remaining, we're not told specifically how he had used it, and all we're told is that he uses the time well. So we may get some follow-up later on as far as what he did with that extra 40 minutes. Because for him, 40 minutes is enough time for him to do what he just did 2 more times. But with Uranos, because of his history of how he handled the secrets of the machine, I kinda got a feeling that whatever he did with this time, it likely had something to do along the lines of creating leverage for himself again to fulfill his purpose. But at this point, with the 1 hour being over, Uranos then heads back to the exclusion, and with doing so, he's confident in his work. He's good at killing things, and it's for that reason that he never checks his work, which in this instance was a huge mistake, because as soon as he leaves, we find that Xylo had hid Lotus, which shows us our first 2 survivors right there. To where then next, Lotus then goes to check on Aura, and he finds that Aura's eye was gouged, but her body was untouched. And while Lotus is here, he says that her weapon will require much healing, which for the Arakko, weapon translates to mutant power. So for Aura, her eye will need much healing. But then it's at this point where we then find that we have yet one more survivor. Because as Lotus tries to gather Aura, he mentions that the weapons of Uranos, they're still roaming around unchecked, so they gotta move carefully, they gotta strategize, and it's here where a voice tells Lotus no. With respect, Lotus, such strategies are not a matter for the Table Dusk, which for reference you guys, the Table Dusk is comprised of Xylo, Lotus, and Aura, who like we'd seen just now, they're still alive. More or less. But then this voice continues to say, this is a war we are losing, and the seat of loss takes command. Because on the Great Ring, much like the Quiet Council has their seasons, their autumn, winter, their summer, the Great Ring has their day, their dawn, their dusk. And the Table Dawn specifically, they're consulted in the time of war. And at that table, there are 3 seats. And in one seat, you have Iska, who again, she would be consulted in the time of victory. In the next seat, you have, or had, Idol, who would be consulted at the time that there was a stalemate, and in that very last seat at the table Dawn, you have Magneto, who is consulted when battles are lost, which means from here, he takes command, even though he's holding himself together without a heart. And remember, once again, Magneto has taken resurrection out of the equation for himself. So one, he had to do this just to make sure he didn't die, but also in the event that he did die, he would lose his seat. And Magneto is not going to let this slide, not after all the genocide that he's seen in his lifetime. And from here, we're told that the hour of Magneto begins. And that right there just lets us know that pretty soon we're gonna see that version of Magneto that he said that he fears the most. And I'm gonna let you know right now, I can't wait to see it. But also, last but not least, before I forget, I know some of you have already gone in the comments and said, "Dope, man, how could you say that Nightcrawler had the most clutch move when all he did was remove A.X.E from the board?" And all I gotta say to that is, if Nightcrawler did not remove A.X.E from the board, I believe that Magneto would have died. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I'll let you guys take over that debate in the comments. I look forward to seeing it. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.